show for today, and my name is RJ Remisha Basache. So, Agritech empowering the rural farmers. Pakistan is a lower middle income country with a GDP of USD 263.7 billion with service industrial and agriculture, the three major contributing sectors. Being
normal bank account still, I think, needs to improve despite adding the microfinance banks and the branchless banking accounts. The aggregate supply of credit to 300 billion, I think thanks to State Bank of Pakistan, it's improved considerably, and I believe it's over 1.5 trillion now. New innovation in products, policy support coming in terms of various receipts and much more. But I still think that agriculture has a huge potential. It needs to be tapped. Now, I think coming from my own, supporting my colleague from the banking sector, I understand the financing is low, but this sector is very low income. It's high risk, poorly organized, and subject to environmental factors that are hard to predict and control, and it has always been a colossal challenge for any banker to finance. So this is a reality from a banking perspective, but the positive news, like I alluded to earlier, was that thanks to technology, innovations, and digital financial services, they have made it possible for lending institutions to serve the agriculture sector in the rural economy. New solutions have created less expensive opportunities for gathering, analyzing, and processing information. To determine the creditworthiness of the multiple sector, thanks to technology, we should be able to do better and contribute to our economy, GDP, employment, and economic development in Pakistan. I wish to commend the efforts of the FinTech Network and also the PMN for coming together and getting all the stakeholders together. I'd like to wish you all very productive deliberations today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for having a few words with us. Now I would like to call upon stage the Director, Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture Division CWER, Central and West Asia, Ms. Yasmin Siddiqui. Ms. Yasmin Siddiqui. Okay, she's virtual, all right. She's virtual right now, so let's reconnect to her virtually. Her virtually, just have a few minutes with us. I should call the other guest with us. It is Chairman Pakistan Fin Network, Syed Nadeem Hussain. Please come on stage and have a few words with us. Thank you.
Honorable Governor, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. It's my singular pleasure to be here today. जब हम एग्रीकल्चर की बात करते हैं तो obviously we refer to the conventional side of agriculture, लेकिन दुनिया में agriculture बदल रहा है और Agritech is what is providing the momentum and the catalyst for changing two things, yield and productivity. एंड में हमारा नज़्मुल एंड क्या है? नज़्मुल एंड ये कि हम फार्मर की इनकम चेंज करें, क्योंकि हम जो बड़े नंबर्स की बात करते हैं, you know, where we are, what production, you know, whether we are top producers of certain things or not, our lens has to be कि काश्तकार की आमदनी में हम क्या फ़र्क ला सकते हैं using digital technologies that we'll talk about today. और इस कॉन्फ्रेंस का मतलब ही यही है कि we bring in the various stakeholders together. इस किस्म की नौयत की कॉन्फ्रेंस पहले मैंने अटेंड नहीं की है कि हम यहाँ आप देखेंगे from financiers to insurance of our GDP. So services dominates our GDP, agriculture does not. But agriculture in turn employs a disproportionate number of people. 38% of all labor force is employed by either agriculture directly or indirectly. Of the 78 hectares in Pakistan, 28 hectares is used for agriculture. And the most important factor, this is where technology was going to play a driving force. 90% of all water consumption in Pakistan is by agriculture. It's not the big cities which are using your water, and we are talking about water scarcity. So we have to figure out how to improve its usage of water, and that's again where technology is going to come in. Our composition of agriculture is very similar to that of our neighboring countries. We are dominated by small shareholdings. 58% of agriculture in Pakistan is dominated by small shareholding, under 5%, which means that everything is fragmented. And then when you create policies, getting to the small individual farm holders is where the challenge arises. So it's not large corporate farming that you have in the Western world where single intervention can lead to thousands and thousands of acres. Here we need to go to the individual farmers to try and create our intervention. We are actually in the top 10 production in at least 7 things in the world. Major crops, wheat, sugarcane, rice, quinoa, mangoes, dates. These are all things where we are up in the top 10. But still, in the end, the income level of the farmer is at the lower end. So having these numbers is great, but unless we can translate it back to the income of the farmer, then we are not doing what we are supposed to do. So the lens that I would like to see today is the farmer's lens. Whatever policy, whatever we are advocating, whatever intervention we are talking about, how is that going to change the farmer's life and the farmer's income? And again, financial intervention is great, but does it result into yield and productivity gains? So I'm going to talk about 7 technologies globally that we are seeing which are enhancing Agritech. The first one is data-driven agriculture. You know, in some parts of the world, there are 160,000 data points per farm per day which are generated. 160,000. मैं तो कह रहा हूँ अगर हम 160 data points के लिए, that would be a great start. But we are not using the information because we are fragmented, as I mentioned earlier, to collectively use this data across the value chain to create policy. These data points are talking about the yield of the farmer, what pesticide he's using, what seed he's using, what kind of water leveling that he's done, where is he selling, where is he buying, what's his hold period. These data points will create policies. These data points will provide potential data points for potential lenders, because these are the data points that you can use rather than using the passbook or rather than using the gold ornaments. These are data points that can be used for providing credit and enhancing the farmer's income. The second thing I want to talk about is the use of cell phone technology. While we have 55 million smartphones, 2G phones, which are some feature phones, are used and can be used for disseminating information. Information is the big equalizer. जब आप information को बराबर कर देते हैं for the price of inputs, for e-mandi access, for the price of material being used or equipment being used, then you bring the farmer closer to the market rather than be at the mercy of आरतीस, और यहाँ वेरियस कंपनीज हैं, आप देखेंगे जैसे कंपनी कॉल फॉर एग्जांपल जमींदार, which Radio Zamindar, which provides through IVR 12 hours of access of information and data points to the farmers. This is what we need to figure out. Use what the farmers have. If they have a 2G phone, figure out how we can use that to providing further inputs to enhance, again, their productivity, yield, and therefore their income. The third thing we've seen globally, but we've just seen very little in Pakistan, is the use of drones for thermal imaging, the use of drones for using pesticides, the use of drones for estimating crop yield. अब जब आपका लोकस का अटैक हुआ था तो the use of drone was very effective in Pakistan. हम उस पर अब शुरू कर रहे हैं. दुनिया के अंदर ड्रोन टेक्नोलॉजी, ज़मीन आसमान का फ़र्क है in the yield. There are case studies already. 1 एकड़ को ड्रोन इस्तेमाल करने के लिए पेस्टिसाइड की एक बार 600 रुपये लगते हैं. That's it. This is not expensive technology, and potentially there's a 35% yield. These are case studies we have seen. So we need to figure out how to use the technologies that exist in Pakistan. ये दूर की बात नहीं है. This technology exists in Pakistan. उसको हम किस तरह enhance कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि directly उससे income बढ़ेगी farmer की, plus आपका loan ज़्यादा secure होगा, plus अगर आप default insurance करा रहे हैं तो आपका premium भी कम होगा. The fourth one is agri-biotech. यहाँ हमने सबसे कम काम किया है. Looking at alternatives, protein methods, looking at harnessing what we have, not talking about genetic engineering, I'm talking about how to use biotech, how to improve more organic crop. And agri-biotech is a big field, but in Pakistan it remains something that we haven't even touched on as yet. Agri-finance and insurance is something that we've seen that's grown, especially the microfinance sector has done a great job, as has the commercial banks and the directive of the state bank. But as we come down the land holding, then this lending becomes less and less sparse, because banks still are not down at the grassroots level, although microfinance institutions and microfinance banks are. On the insurance side, we're now starting to, although State Bank has done this for a while, crop insurance, but the utilization hasn't been big, but we've seen default insurance, weather insurance, crop insurance. And one thing that I haven't talked about as much, and hopefully in the course of the day we will, of the 18.5% agriculture component of GDP, 11% is actually livestock. Livestock by itself is far larger than any major crop that we have. So what is our policies? What can technology do to improve the livestock segment as well? The sixth point, ladies and gentlemen, is supply chain. Now, supply chain can be upstream, which means that where are you getting the inputs from? And there are companies which are going to be represented today, will talk to you about how they're providing high quality inputs instead of cash to the farmer directly from the correct manufacturer. So placebo kind of, whether it's pesticide, fertilizer, inputs, are not provided. And this ecosystem starts with the provision of input, which is the upside of the supply chain. The downstream supply chain, you'll also see companies today which are accessing the market directly, which are going to the farmer and bringing the produce directly to the end customer, bypassing the intermediaries, bypassing the mandis, therefore reducing both the time and improving the return to the farmer. So supply chain is something we'll be discussing a lot more today, both upstream and downstream. And the last thing I want to talk about, which is only done in few places in the world, but we can think about it, although it's in the further distance, is the use of blockchain in agriculture. And blockchain, when I'm talking about blockchain, is talking about track and trace. There is ample examples in the world where contaminated food or low quality yielding food needs to be sourced to, that's my 10 minutes, so I'm 1 minute late. Okay, needs to be sourced to where it's coming from. And track and trace using blockchain can be something that down the line which can be used as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll end my talk again with these two things. One, our lens has to be that of the farmer. How can we increase the income? Everything that we do should result in the farmer's income being increased. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
All right. थैंक यू सो मच सर सैयद नदीम हुसैन, थैंक यू सो मच. और अभी हमारे साथ जो है वो वर्चुअली कनेक्टेड है मिस यास्मीन सिद्दीकी. सो हम उन्हें कनेक्ट कर देते हैं वर्चुअली अपने साथ. कैन वी कनेक्ट विथ हर? Okay, thank you. Okay, I think there is some kind of technical issue. बस connect होने लगी हैं. ओके, कनेक्शन में कुछ टेक्निकल इशू आ रहा है, तो इसकी वजह से अब मैं बुलाना चाहती हूँ गवर्नर स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान मिस्टर रज़ा बाकर टू प्लीज़ कम ऑन स्टेज एंड हैव फ्यू वर्ड्स. थैंक यू सर, सॉरी आपको वेट करना पड़ा.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम. सबसे पहले तो आई वांट टू थैंक सैयद नदीम हुसैन साहिब. Let me recognize Ghalib Nishtar Sahib. Let me welcome all the participants to today's event. And thank you really for having me with you today to share my thoughts on the topic today. I want to say at the outset that the theme at today's event, bringing together agriculture, microfinance, and fintech, I think is really a very good idea. So I congratulate the organizers of this event. And I was looking at the schedule for today and the panel discussions that are organized, the opportunity that they will bring for many of you in this Agritech space to exchange and compare notes. I think that is going to be critically important. I'll talk a little bit more towards the end of my speech as to what I see the challenges, and I'll dwell on this a little bit more. So let me first congratulate the organizers of this event. In my remarks, I want to focus on three things. The first is I want to talk a little bit about the importance of Agritech for the global economy. Second, I would like to share with you some of the initiatives that the State Bank of Pakistan has taken, not just in promoting agriculture finance, which is something that we normally do, but also some of the digitization efforts that we have launched recently, which we think can provide a good backbone for all of the work that you're doing in Agritech. And finally, I would like to end on some challenges that I see for the Agritech space and some suggestions for how many of you who are in this space can address those challenges. So let me begin first of all with a little bit of facts and figures on the importance of Agritech in the global economy. With thanks to Nadeem Saab for sharing some of these statistics with me, According to the World Bank, 2/3 of the global population living in extreme poverty. So if you take all the people living in extreme poverty, 2/3 depend on farming for their livelihood. So for anybody who is working in the field of poverty reduction, then addressing productivity growth in farming, you can see is a direct way to reduce poverty in the world. Number two, the population of the world is set to grow to over 9 billion people by 2050. And with that amount of growth, the UN estimates that at the very least, the agricultural output by 2050 will need to double. So that in turn points to the importance of using new technologies to increase agricultural output. This is becoming all the more pressing because the current farming practices are depleting the farm soil, exacerbating deforestation, as well as water scarcity. So the application of technology towards feeding a population that is going to reach 9 billion becomes all the more important. Further, looking within the agricultural sector, dairy and meat is an area which is very resource intensive to produce. And as middle classes increase in the income distribution of countries as they grow, the demand for dairy and meat in particular increases. Now, these are some of the challenges at the global level that we are facing to reduce poverty and to feed the world. But now I want to talk a little bit about Pakistan. And we have already heard from the speakers before me about the share that agriculture has in the economy as well as in the labor force. Where Pakistan stands right now, particularly in terms of yield, leaves something to be desired. I want to share statistics with regards to wheat, productivity, as well as with regards to rice. So when we look at wheat, the average yield in Pakistan, and of course there is variation across districts or across farms, but the average yield in Pakistan is 2.8 tons per hectare. This 2.8 for Pakistan for wheat compares to 3.4 for India and 5.7 to China. So our yield in agriculture is nearly half that of China. Let's look at rice, another key staple agricultural product for us. Our yield is 2.5 tons per hectare. India is 3.9, and China is 7. So a bit more than double the yield that we have. This is due to several factors, and of course the size of the farms and many other things are related. But for everybody that is here today, one message that I would want to give is about the link between investment in agricultural R&D, research and development, and productivity growth. And I think that this link and our efforts at research and development in these areas should help us to figure out why our yield is so much lower, less than half than it is in China. So that was my first point about the importance of everything that you're doing today. It's important, whatever you're doing, there's a value proposition for you, but while you're at it and while you discover an opportunity that's going to make money for you, I think it's important at the back of your mind to remember the contribution that your work makes for reducing global poverty, as well as feeding the world's population. Now let me come to the State Bank's role in agricultural sector. And I want to start by talking about the bread and butter, which is agricultural finance. And as some of you may know, the State Bank has an Agricultural Credit Advisory Committee, which is a committee that consists of many stakeholders, banks, the representatives of provincial authorities, farmers, and others. And this is a committee that brings all these stakeholders together. And amongst other areas, it also sets a target for how much banks are supposed to disburse to agricultural lending each year. Last year, I am happy to share that in fiscal year 2021, the total disbursement reached 1.4 trillion rupees in Pakistan. And the target for this year has been set at 1.7 trillion rupees, of which 835 billion has already been disbursed during the first 8 months of this fiscal year. But in addition to simply talking about giving targets to banks for how much they're supposed to lend, there are some other important initiatives that the State Bank of Pakistan has either led or pushed, which we think are critical for boosting productivity in agriculture. The first is the automated land record system to improve the turnaround time for banks. And this is a very, very important area where Punjab has taken the lead and is critical for banks to be able to provide financing. Second, an initiative very close to my heart is the promotion of electronic warehouse receipt financing. This is a very simple concept where the idea is that there are warehouses that are constructed that are certified and registered by collateral management companies, such that when a farmer wants to store their produce there or sell their produce, they get a receipt which can serve as collateral for getting bank financing, or can also be traded in the securities markets. And what this does is it eliminates the dependence of the farmer on the aarti, where the farmer gets a very, very steep discount for his or her agricultural crop, and allows the farmer to get immediate financing at more affordable rates to purchase urea and fertilizer and all the other needs that they have for the next sowing season. Despite it being a simple idea, we have been frustrated that it has not taken off that we thought the way it would. And so we formed a dedicated group led by banks, and I think Khashif from HBL is speaking later today as well. He is a big part of it. From the State Bank, we have representation as well, and we are hoping that that is going to make a push in this area. There are many other areas as well. For instance, we have created now the idea of champion banks for those provinces where agricultural credit is particularly low. I was sharing with you the targets for agricultural credit disbursement for the whole country. But when you look at its distribution across provinces, there are big disparities. And Balochistan, for instance, is one very glaring example of a disparity. So we have created the idea of champion banks, which means that certain banks will take the lead in certain underrepresented areas to provide agricultural finance and improve the distribution of agricultural credit across provinces. Now, this was some of the work that's being done by the ACAC. I want to now turn to some of the digitization initiatives that the State Bank has launched, which we think will help the Agritech world. The first is the Asan Mobile Account Scheme, AMA. And AMA requires a feature phone. It does not require a smartphone, and it runs on 2G as well as anything higher. And using the short code system, anybody can open a bank account. Anybody can open a bank account by dialing *2262# from their phone. And since we launched this in December 2021, by March of this year, 2.7 million AMA accounts have been opened. So this is easy access point for the farmers that you work with to get them into the banking system. For those farmers who are more comfortable with mobile usage and with smartphones, the State Bank introduced something called Asan Digital Account. An Asan Digital Account offers more account balances, more services through the account, but requires a smartphone. And with many banks, we are pushing our agenda that such accounts can now be opened completely remotely. Just like we offered Roshan digital accounts to overseas Pakistanis where they can open accounts remotely, the Asan digital account, as the integration proceeds with banks, through the app of the bank, the biometric is done remotely. And for the Asan digital account, there is no need to provide a third-party verification or certification of income either. It is open on the basis of self-declaration, and it has a limit on the account balance, and therefore it contains the risks as well. Next is RAST. RAST is the payment rails that we have introduced, which is a instant payment system. This is on the frontier of payment systems being used in those countries which are at the forefronts of using digital methods for payments. RAST is instant, it's free, unlike IBFT where there are hidden charges, but RAST is completely free. And it offers you the opportunity to use your mobile phone as your RAST ID. And it is something that is growing now very rapidly, and you will see more advertising communication from our side to promote the usage of RAST. But RAST for you, because the direction to banks is that the entire payment has to be processed within 20 seconds. So after you click send on your phone, the recipient receives the money within 20 seconds. So that, for everybody working in Agritech, can allow you to sell digital solutions more comfortably if the farmer is able to see the confirmation of the payment that is received in such a short period of time. Next is the digital bank licensing framework that we have introduced. We have received 20 applications for 5 licenses that we will issue in the first stage, and one of the areas that we mentioned in our licensing framework, which is very important for us in terms of promoting financial inclusion, is agriculture and the penetration and the inclusion for farmers. So we are very excited that through digital banks, some will come and will focus on bringing the agricultural sector more into our financial sector. There are many other initiatives that we have taken towards digitization, but I'll skip those and come to the last part of what I want to talk about, which is what are some of the opportunities and challenges and some suggestions for you as you take your work forward. First of all, I think when we talk about farmers and agriculture, I'm often struck that we tend to be quite broad, and we lump all different types of subsectors in agriculture together and all different regions under one big umbrella. In our view, this discussion is often quite overly broad, it's often simplistic, it's filled with assumptions, and not enough nuance. The diversity and the complexity of our vast rural communities, I think, gets lost when we characterize agriculture as one sector. This needs to change in our view, and I think it can happen through a fresh perspective coming in from the new and Agritech startups working on entering the agricultural value chain financing space. Different sectors, different areas. Farm households are smallholder farms. The formal credit penetration to the smallholder farmers is about 50%. So only half of these small farmers, which is 90% of the 8 million, are getting formal credit access. So digital technologies here have the power to transform agri-food systems by accelerating the work of participants across the value chain, including the input players, the producers, the off-takers, and retailers. And a specific focus on small farm holders, I think, using digitization is our second key point. Third, small farm holders typically rely on traditional means of farming. And therefore, there is a great opportunity for financial literacy in this sector to get them to adopt modern farming practices and to increase their crop yield. Fourth, and I think a critically important point, is about data. And in our view, there is a need for a public-private partnership to develop information systems where data pertaining to land records, cropping pattern, historical yields, quality and grading of produce becomes available to financial service providers to serve these small farmers. Data is a collective good. It won't come together on its own, and therefore there is a need for a public-private partnership, and it would enable smallholder farmers to have access then to a suite of financial services, including agri-insurance, which will allow them to take better decisions. My last point is a point about our experience with Agritech so far. As shared by PFN, currently there are more than about 25 Agritech companies that are operating in the market. Several startups are working on different verticals of the agri value chains, covering the entire spectrum of agri activities, from digital onboarding of farmers to using satellite-based assessments of crops, to providing marketplaces for selling their produce. However, despite many opportunities, many of the agri-tech startups are falling behind on the main outcome, which is market penetration. One of the main reasons, in our view, of this is the lack of collaboration. And that's why an event like this, where ideas can be exchanged, I think is very important. It appears that most agri-tech companies are working in silos, and they are missing out on inter- and intra-industry collaboration to boost synergies. So the true potential of the unique and innovative solutions offered by various stakeholders in the agri-tech space is something that we are not being able to see or capitalize yet. And I think that's an important challenge for us. So I would like to conclude on this note that while digitization of agri-finance is an essential part, there is a need for agri-tech to develop synergies across the players. And there is a need for synergies with banks and other financial institutions to achieve the economies of scale and of scope. I would like to cite from our own experience of engagement with different agri-tech startups through pilots with banks to explore new areas for farmer financing. These projects were focused on improving value chain financing, credit recovery, crop monitoring through unmanned aerial vehicles, and provision of value-added services. However, due to limited capacity and technical expertise of the agri-tech startups, banks were not able to scale up these initiatives. So I would like to stress, as I end, the need for not thinking that one company should do everything, but rather how can you work with others while still having an opportunity for yourselves and realizing scale, which is, I think, going to be key for these efforts to be sustainable. At the end, I just want to assure the organizers of today's event, all the participants, that the State Bank of Pakistan remains very strongly committed to the goal of promoting digitization in the agricultural sector to support an environment where agri-techs flourish, and more broadly, to support fintechs and digitization in our financial sector. Thank you once again for having me with you in today's morning session.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zabakir, for giving us a good speech. और अब जो है वो नमाज का वक्त हो गया है, तो नमाज पढ़ने जा सकते हैं आप लोग, और इसके बाद फिर हम कनेक्ट होंगे आफ्टर 12:45 तक. तो 15 मिनट्स का नमाज ब्रेक है, उसके बाद हम आपसे दोबारा मिलते हैं यहीं पर. थैंक यू.